measurable increase in organized efforts to discuss the lack of shows that reflect the real worlds we live in. Real worlds of brown and black bodies, of differently abled bodies, reflecting gender fluidity and sexual and racial differences. Because that's what the real world looks like. And then I have this whole bit where I read the Riot Grrrl Manifesto. But in the interest of time, rather, because I have these lovely women that I brought here, I'm just going to show you little bits of what Ladyz and Noyz has done over the past 10 years. So when I was talking before about kind of like the discontents, Ladyz and Noyz was conceptualized in 2003 when I was in this project called Hazardous Guadalupe, which a lot of people called like really bad lightning bolt or hella. We went on a renegade tour kind of at the time, like the Friends Forever renegade kind of tours. And during that time, I was running around with my gear a lot of the time and having a lot of reactions to being a woman on tour. And I was talking to other women promoters, and they were kind of saying like, yeah, there's this thing, like, can we talk about how this feels? Like, I kind of feel like we can't really say that we're treated differently, or that how we have different obstacles because of planning and supporting each other, and how do we work around that? And so that's where it started, and then 4 years later is when I actually did the first release, which was on the first label. Spleen Coffin was the original label. Now we kind of launched our own thing called Corpus Callosum, and this involved 32 different artists from around the world, like some of them like Sharky Face, Noveller, Leslie Kaffer, just a good variety of good peoples, and that was in 2008. Then we followed up with Ladyz and Noyz and Addendum, which was more of a salute to the Pacific Northwest, and tend to be of the like very shouty and wonderful that way. I think at the time I was really interested in civil rights legislation, so I had to use like a legal term, and so therefore it was an addendum. And then we did Ladyz and Noyz 3, and recently Ladyz and Noyz 3.5. All of these, and you can find all these, they exist in Bandcamp form and very few printed limited copies. There's also a segment of Ladyz and Noyz which exists in Australia called Ladyz and Noyz in Australia, and they curate, because they have different challenges down there, they curate their own set of events and their own concerns dealing with the racial differences there as well. And also there's a different language around racial identity. So I found it very interesting that they kind of saw Ladyz and Noyz as an opportunity to kind of like the way Lady Fest is. They're like, can we take this and make it your own? Which is the point of Ladyz and Noyz, is that to be a member, you just want to be a member, and you start asking for resources, and then next thing you know, you're a member of Ladyz and Noyz. And if you have something to offer, then you're a member of Ladyz and Noyz. Then in 2016, I did this film called An International Call and Response, and you might have seen it here, because it premiered here at TUSK, where I talked about my understanding about how Ladyz and Noyz feminist collectives work, comparing it to the call and response pattern. And then, which you might recognize Ingrid from that film as well. She's also, since I moved to the UK, it's very interesting, like some people since I've gotten here have been very like attuned to like the Ladyz and Noyz networks. It was very easy for me to move from the US and to actually continue to do the same work in that same way, which is another thing that we talked about, sonic cyber feminisms, about how technology enables for that continuity. So other than the film, we also had, we've had 2 events in Leeds, and one of them was supported also by the Yorkshire Women's Sound Network, which had some of the Algorave people of Joanne Armitage and Shelley Knotts of Newcastle fame, and also Awful. And then we also had Voiced with Silver Dick and Belisha Beacon, who's also a coder, Anna Peaker, Kelly Jane Jones, and I think Mel Delaney played as well. She's also the one who did the Mel Delaney from Ashtray Navigations, the artwork for that. So this was a compilation that we did when Trump was elected. which was a wonderful time for me. I kind of was such at a loss, I really didn't know what to do except for to like openly cry and talk to other people about being like, what do we do about the anti-fascist turn? Like, how do we start to organize in ways, how do we get money to kind of say this is not what we want? And so it was rhinoceritis. And because of like how our skin gets irritated and how we have to endure and revolt. So I know that was like a really like quick 10-minute term, but I think it's more important to see how feminist collectives work. So I'm just gonna go ahead and turn it over to Miranda, who will talk a little bit about her experience with sonic cyberfeminisms.
Hello, can you hear me? Is that all right? Yeah.
You need to be closer.
A bit closer? No, all right.
I think it's actually good for your height.
That's good. Yeah, well, thanks for coming along to our talk. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about sonic cyberfeminisms. This is a picture that I took surreptitiously during our last meeting in the Open Studio. So we had this residency at Organising recently. I hadn't been there before. Maybe some of you have been there for the festivals. But it was really great. We lived together for a week, cooking for each other, discussing, making things. There was a recording studio too, so we made a zine and a podcast, which is coming out soon, so look out for that. And there were around 10 of us, I think. Oh, that's a bit cut off. Don't know if you could see. So there was Robin, Natalie, Shantisuki, Marlo, Annie, Marie, Jane, Francis, and then also Louise, who wasn't there at the time. And I'm just going to read a bit from the introduction that's going to be in the zine, just saying a bit more about sonic cyberfeminism. So this was actually written by Annie Go and Marie Thompson, who initiated these projects, because it's like an ongoing open project that's had many different sort of iterations, so it's constantly evolving. And like you were saying, it's like a thinking, exploratory thing. So, just going to read. Sonic Cyberfeminisms is an ongoing project that explores the relationship between gender, feminism, sound and technology. The project began in February 2014 with a panel discussion at CTM Festival in Berlin, organised by Annie Go, featuring Sadie Plant, Fender Schreider, Marie Thompson and Susanna Kirkmeyer. And since then there's been lots of different events, reading groups, discussions that have been organised by Annie and Marie. So you might have been on the Sonic Cyberfeminisms reading group, or you might have gone to an event in Goldsmiths, or conference in Lincoln, and now you're here, so you know you're part of it too. So Sonic Cyberfeminisms is an attempt to open up a space for criticality, storytelling, speculation and questioning. It comes from an interested dissatisfaction with dominant conversations that focus on representation, inclusion and empowerment, that assume that gender is the same thing as woman, and that assume that technology means the latest hardware and software. There are many things that are being left out if we let these terms determine our discussions. We talk of sonic cyberfeminisms rather than feminism for a number of reasons. We've partly been influenced by the ideals, strategies and failures of cyberfeminist thinkers and artists. Emerging in the early 90s, the amorphous movements of cyberfeminism sought to explore the potentials and possibilities of technology, computing and cyberspace for feminist practice. Though often understood as celebrating the possibilities of technologies, some cyberfeminists were also critical of the post-identity dreams of cyberspace, the racist histories of techno-modernity, and the invisibilized labor that prop up technocultures. These are some of the things that we think deserve more attention. And the cyber of cyberfeminisms refers not only to cyberspace, but also cybernetics. And with this, we move towards a language of control, networks, systems, and environments. Cyberfeminism is a feminism of steering, of channeling, connecting, disconnecting, building structures. And as Marlo kind of hinted at and gestured towards, Sonic Cyberfeminisms is also a project born out of friendship and the desire for community in the so-called post-digital world. The Sonic Cyberfeminisms residency was a space of caring, feeding and sharing with one another, listening to each other's hurts about experiences of exclusion, humiliation, marginalization, exploitation. It's been a space where we could afford to be ambivalent in our ambitions and orientations, to take critical distance from the opportunities offered to us and to reflect upon what we are complicit within, to share secrets and gossip, joy and creativity, which are, after all, important feminist technologies of steering, mediation and control. So it's basically about exploring and disentangling and breaking and disorienting different relationships between gender, feminism, technology and sound, not fixing any of those terms. So it's an ongoing thing. It was really great to be in a recording studio for a week. Here's a drawing of some of the stuff that was going on. So we had lots of different workshops thinking about all of these different concepts and had different sort of sound pieces. You can see Jane is doing a sort of sound poem, Natalie was doing some recording, then Annie was around doing stuff, Francis was having discussion about technology with Marie. Robin, who you might know as RKSS, and Natalie jamming. This is a collage, so we also, they had a load of wires and frieze, so we're making loads of collages, quite interesting. We're thinking about the aspect of embodiment in making music and sound, so this was just a collage about the prevalence of hands in images of making. Everyone brought books, so we had a sort of Sonic Cyberfeminism's library that we shared with each other, which is, you know, feel free to add some stuff in the Q&A. So here's some of the things that we were reading. You might, Sound Gender Feminism Activism Conference you might have been to, bell hooks. This is a good article if you want to know more about Sonic Cyberfeminisms from Annie Go, Claire Hemmings, some other stuff that you might be into. So I think I'm just going to pass over to Ingrid now, but thanks.
Which one is full screen? Oh, no. Which one? That one? Okay. Hey, okay. Hello, can you hear me? I'm just gonna enter this. It's a bit broken.
Either one, just hold it.
Yeah, I'll just hold it. Okay. So thanks for coming to the talk and sticking it out. So my name's Ingrid Plum, and I am a singer and a sound artist, and I work primarily as a performer and also make installations, sound art installations. So I found myself being asked quite a lot to be the woman on the lineup, the female artist on the lineup. And quite often it came about in terms of, I've just realised I've got an all-male lineup. Please come and play. Or I'd be asked, do you know any female artists? Can you tell us who we should book? Which is a great question. I used to say, book these artists. But now I just say, here are some websites of directories of artists that you can go and do your own research and get to know, and then it's not nepotism, and then it opens it up to lots of people. So that was the position I found myself in, and then I decided to create Bechdel. So Bechdel is named after the Bechdel test in film, which is that Alison Bechdel, a cartoonist, drew a cartoon. It's only 2 frames. In the first frame, 2 female friends say they want to go to the cinema. The other one says, I won't go unless there is a film showing where for some time in the film, 2 women who are named within the film talk about something other than the men in the film. And they come back and they can't go to the cinema because none of the films pass what is now called the Bechdel test. And I wanted to kind of apply that to music. So I started this night called Bechdel, which was a series of events where it was an all-female lineup, except for a token male on the lineup. Yeah, because we're not sexist. And it was a knee-jerk reaction, to be honest, when I sat this night. I was just like, I'm doing this. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. DIY. Boom. And then something really interesting happened. A lot of non-binary artists got in touch with me because they wanted to play Bechdel. And I was honoured that Verity Spot launched her trans manifesto, which she'd worked on for 5 years at Bechdel. And I think the highest compliment I've got for Bechdel is that at the end of that night, a bunch of non-binary artists were sitting around talking about safe spaces, and they were using My Night Bechdel as the bar to compare what other safe spaces there were. And this was not really my goal. I was making a knee-jerk reaction, but by doing that, this opened up space. So it's quite interesting that you don't actually have to do a massive amount, I think, to create that space. It can really just arise quite naturally once you start to just think a bit differently and make a different format and mix things up a bit. Space gets created. So here are some of the wonderful artists who have played on Bechdel. And what else happened that I didn't imagine at the beginning is that artists started to ask me from the start, can I do something new? And I was like, it's your space. You do whatever you want. I'm just here to support you. We're an all-female tech team. And what happened is that every artist started to do a new project. They used Bechdel as the chance to experiment. And that brings up some interesting questions around, do women have to come in at an expert level? Do we have to be showing something that's already polished? Are we allowed to make mistakes? Are we allowed to learn? Are we allowed to share skills? Are we allowed to learn in the same way? Do female identifying artists get that opportunity within a performance environment? And so a lot of really amazing experiments started at Bechdel and have gone on to have lives afterwards because they were given a little bit of a space to start. Up on the top left there is Electric Elizabeth, who does amazing things with a bucket. She really does. You should see what she can do with a bucket. It's brilliant. And this was her first or second ever gig, and she's now out there gigging, and it's brilliant. And the interesting thing we ran through in the setup was setting up her sound. She had some feedback going, and we went through it and we did some troubleshooting step by step, as you do, through each stage. And at each stage, she asked to quit. She asked to cancel the performance because the fact that she was having a technological problem was so, embarrassing for her, and she couldn't handle it. And I said, no, we'll just work through it step by step. And we worked through it step by step, solved the problem. She did the performance, and then at the end came and thanked me and said, thank you so much for not letting me cancel. And so that's just another story to show an example of just how little it takes, really. If you're sitting here and you've listened to all these great things that are happening and you're thinking, what can I do? It doesn't really take that much. Just time. So give the artist time to work through the problems and space, really. So this is a little quote from Virginia Woolf. And I started off the first ever Bechdel with this. And I've got it in a bit more. Where's my thing? Here. Now that she had rid herself of falsehood, that young woman had only to be herself. Ah, but what is herself? I mean, what is a woman? And then it's a great passage, and it's in the essay book, Killing the Angel in the House. And the angel is what a woman is supposed to be. The angel that she has to kill in order to become a writer is this idea of what she should be. And she sees herself, she visualizes herself murdering the angel in order to access the ink and the pen to begin writing, because the angel is blocking her way. I do not believe that anybody can know until she has expressed herself in all the arts and professions open to human skill. So that's basically what Bechdel is about, is that idea of having it open to that kind of expression. That is my website, if you want to have a look at more about Bechdel. And also, if you want to listen to the artists and get to know the artists, there's a Mixcloud on Resonance FM show called The Best of Bechdel. So if you Google that, you can find it. So that's Bechdel. And then I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about taught. Yeah, I'm going to drag that over. And then go, oh, I should have just gone full screen with it. Da, da, da. Bear with me. Okay. Just going to play you a little clip from the documentary about taught, and then I'll talk about it. If it's playing. You got internet? Yep. We are on the internet. Okay. Aha, brilliant. All right. I wanted a really wide spread of disciplines, so people working with sound in very, very different ways. I wrote a brief that was pretty open, but had a few stipulations, in that it needed to be for my voice and for percussion or electronics as well, and also that it needed to be one side of A4 and approximately 5 minutes in length. And I said I would sing any kind of notation whatsoever. I came into this space here and rehearsed these scores, and I spent some really isolated and intensively focused time on each score. To do that for a few months was almost like a practice a meditation teacher described to me, where he said to me, don't just meditate when you feel like it. You have to set a timer and meet yourself at that time every day, because if you only meditate when you feel like it, you're going to meet nice, chilled out Ingrid, and you're not going to meet, ripping your hair out Ingrid. So the rehearsal was kind of like that. I met myself through these scores, through the structure of them. Okay, so this is a project that I spent a year and a half on. So Bechdel has kind of taken a backseat for a while whilst I focused on this project. That doesn't mean I've stopped banging on about equality, though. So what happened, interestingly, with Taught is that when I put out that brief to artists, I used the word composer. And I wanted a 50-50 ratio of female and male identifying composers. I got back only male yeses. Only the male artist said yes to being called a composer. I changed the word, and I sent it out again, and I used the word music maker, writer of music, anything except the word compose to describe the same process of composition. And I got my 50-50 ratio. So if you ever wonder why you're not getting a response from female identifying artists to a call out or something, look at the words you're using and think about the terminology. And what I did is I was like, is this an issue? And I Google image searched the word composer, and immediately I was like, this is an issue. There are just old white dudes on this Google image page. And I scrolled down and it was hard to find anything else. So that's one thing, just a little thing to test it out. And it was very important for me that we start looking at the words like composer, because the whole point of this project is that I was breaking apart what I see as being quite an elitist code in writing music. And I think that it's going to become more elitist as music cuts really start to take effect. You know, when the teenagers that are receiving the brunt of these cuts now start being performing musicians as they get older, we're going to see the language of music having to change. So I was breaking apart that classical mode there. And it's still interesting to me, the shift in the female identifying artists who took part in taught, in having their score performed, and then having it publicly exhibited as an object, and then published in a book. And those 3 stages were really about showcasing those people as composers, and the shift it made in their practice, and how they feel about themselves as composers now, and whether they use the word composer in their bio. So I feel like I've talked quite a lot. Taught is up online if you want to look at it. Just go to my website. There is a Bechdel page on Facebook as well, if you want to hear more about that. I'm going to get that up and running again this year. Thank you for listening.
Great. So now that we kind of had some words, we had some films. We have my dead laptop. What I really wanted was to get a bunch of women on stage just kind of talking. Really, the notes from the field is this part, right? Like, this is where we start saying, like, how did that feel for you? This is what I got from your conversation. And so ideally, I wanted to have, like, 2 plants, maybe a pot of tea, and some, like, treats and stuff like that. And this also came from the experience at Wising, in that, like, it seemed like in those what seem the less examined or the less intentional moments is where we actually were able to, like, create some kind of insight and ask some questions that had that opening of vulnerability where real productive thoughts come out. I just, how'd that go for y'all? Just pass it around. Or I wish you had a thing here.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about both of the projects that you've initiated is, like you're saying, opening up these spaces of experimentation where people can not have to be already established, figure things out together collectively in a non-sort of threatening way. I think that's really important to have those spaces. So I guess just be interesting to know if anyone in the audience is part of other different spaces that they want to share as well. Can't really see anyone, so it's kind of difficult. I'm like, hello.
You're all slightly tinged green as well.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Wow, amazing.
House lights.
How did that feel?
How did that feel?
Well, as a singer, I would rather sing in front of 10,000 people than speak in front of 12 or whatever. So, as usual, there is that thing of getting over that. But that's just a personal note. But I found it really interesting listening to the different approaches of creating space. We are all creating a space. And that brings up questions of, why does it have to be created? Why didn't it exist in the first place? Which, you know, is a whole thing that we can get into. But also brings up questions of, what do people do to do that? And I'm just like gonna say, there are a lot more men at this festival than women. And what I've had in the past from doing talks or from people coming to Bechdel is that I've had a lot of guys come up to me and afterwards and go, I don't know what I can do. Like, what can I do? Because without sounding patronizing, without sounding, you know, all the kind of minefield that exists. So if anyone has those questions of what you want to do, or maybe we can make suggestions of what. what people can do. It doesn't have to be just us making this space.
Yeah, this is also something that was an aspect of recent discussions, was that I think a lot of women who are doing work about like trying to bring up the discussion of representation, and I want to make sure that we're being very clear here that it's about representation, not actual like existence. Like there's already, it's not like how do we get more women and how do we get more marginalized people or able, like differently abled people making music. They're already making music. They're just not, they just don't have access to these platforms. And I want to be very clear that that's what these initiatives are, at least I would say these three in particular, I can't speak for all of them, are about. But it is like exhausting to constantly have to field questions and about being like, I want to be a resource and I want to be available to people, but it's also like we can all, it would be helpful if, I think the strategy of, these are certain like female pressures website or different local directories. There's a couple of like Hear Women, Many Women. And there's a yeah, I think in Feminatronic, there's a lot of places where you can already pick up on a lot of these artists already available. So like, you don't need to go to like the card-carrying person who's doing all the talking about it. You can just do the work yourself. And also, but I want to talk about that reality of being like, that you were saying about being able to be like, when you're an activist and you're speaking for people who don't get heard, often it's you have to be like on all the time. And it's like that the reason why this work is so important, or why it reads that way, is because you're not on all the time. As a matter of fact, you're probably off most of the time. Probably most of the time you're like really angry or feeling out of sorts and you need a nap, and you just feel exhausted by going to this continuum, a barrage of shows that look exactly the same, and sadly, oftentimes that causes for the music to be like, doesn't change in some certain ways. Like I know in certain pockets of the United States, you'll go to certain regions, Noyz Fest, and it's like, well, this is because everyone here, they haven't had anyone new play in this area in a while. It's the same people making the same music. It's the same fest. You could take a picture of this in 1992 and take a picture of it now, and you're going to hear the same HNW. But I digress. But yeah. But I did want to talk about, like, we never get to talk about that part, which is like how you get to both be like a woman who makes music, a woman who's going to these shows, and also like trying to make a difference, but also to just be like, I don't want to constantly have to be like super on. I always think of that like Time magazine, like I'm totally dating myself. I think it's from the 80s, but it's like the woman who's carrying like a baby and like has a vacuum cleaner and like a kind of a briefcase, and it's like the superwoman, and you should do everything. And I feel like when you're in this like activist persona, oftentimes you can't also just be like, you can't just be like, I'm tired.
That reminds me of, you remember I told you about how I got trolled by that dude? Yeah. So I got trolled by someone. Someone said, who should I book for this festival? And I was like, and someone else said on Twitter, more female artists. And I was like, yeah, more female artists, and chiming in. And then some guy pops up and says, which female artists, can you be specific? To which my standard answer now, as I told you, is, here are the directories, go do some research, have fun. And then as this conversation continued, I realized he was not interested in the first place. He called himself being devil's advocate, which is obviously his word for troll. And yeah, and he proceeded to just attack me. And then I left the conversation, left him. So it carried on a while. And then later that day, now this conversation was that we were having was about visibility online. This guy thought he did enough by listening to Spotify, and I was like, and refused to look at the websites and started criticizing the website design and things like that. And I was like, well, I think people should do their own research and discover new artists. And And then he actually attacked my invisibility online. So later that day, my SEO completely changed, and it turned out this guy worked in SEO and attacked my visibility online, which was quite incredible. So I think one of the things I've noticed is like when a female artist tells you a story like that, don't question it. Like just take it as fact. Because like why would we suppose that to be the case? If it wasn't the case, it would be much easier for me to fix, believe me, if it had not been an expert in SEO that had gone in and broken all the websites, and I have to find that in code, which I don't do. I don't code. So that's what that reminded me of, is that you do kind of wear a target symbol when you start doing these things. And that takes up some energy. And it was quite interesting because when I told you about this, you said, but your tweets are untrollable. And they are deliberately untrollable. Like I am protecting myself, you know? Yeah, I don't really have anything more to say on that. Unless anyone is really good at SEO and wants to see me afterwards.
Yeah, I was thinking in response to what you were saying about, maybe being figureheads or like, being tired and exhausted. I think a really important part is supporting each other. So I think that's what I've really been nourished by and loved, but being part of different collectives is supporting each other in different ways and learning from each other and sharing skills and, strategies of surviving different things, but also, so being able to not always have to be, on or visible in specific ways, but doing many things in the background or in different, a variety of ways. And it also goes with lots of the invisibilized labor that happens to make things function, which I'm sure there's loads happening these few days. There is, which is part of what makes it work, and all of these different aspects are really important. And I guess as normally a teacher, I'm always just been like, questions, anyone? Does anyone want to say something or share something? I think it'd be really good to hear about other people's experiences and, obviously it's, gender is not a binary, it's not we want to sort of interrogate all aspects and experiences, so, feel free to raise your hand and say something if you want.
Yeah, and also to that note, like if there's anything that we kind of just flew by in the beginning, if you would like us to like go back over anything or would like some backstory on that, we can do that as well. If I know we have one question already, but it's kind of been addressed. But would you care to ask it, Rob? Since I said your name out loud, Rob.
Earlier today, I tweeted a question in response to Marlo's request for questions. It has been largely addressed, where I asked what were their top tips for allies who want to help. Now, I was conscious. Check out the virtue signaling T-shirt. I was conscious of the kind of the business about being always on like that, but I thought in this context it's okay to ask the question. But you've already talked about giving people space, giving people time, looking at the vocabulary that you use. Again, not treating people as if they're figureheads all the time, that kind of thing. Is there anything over and above that?
Okay, first of all, don't judge me for I know we're at TUSK Festival, and I know that I'm an experimental musician, but don't judge me for the example I'm about to give to you. But Lady Gaga, talking about Trump and talking about various things on the Late Late Show, Stephen Colbert, perfect example of what to do. Handed over the mic, essentially, and just listened. And it's interesting that he didn't try to reframe it. He didn't try to situate it. He didn't try to chip in, or he didn't try to really make it obvious, like virtue signaling, I am on this too. He just gave her the space and the platform. And in a way, the silence he left said more than what he could have said in some ways. But there's a flip side to that as well. So that's kind of, I'm giving you counter instructions here, basically. So there's that. There's creating the platform and the space for the voice to be heard and letting it be heard and leaving enough space around it. And in actual fact, me and Marlo met on a panel, and I think the first moment where she turned was like, you, and I was like, hey, was when I told off one of the male panelists for interrupting me. And it's a common thing, but you know, in terms of within our culture, women are taught to speak from an early age and trained unconsciously to have high, soft voices. So you do have to make an effort to create space around that to be heard, because a male voice is generally quite often gonna be more audible. So there's audibility, and then there's visibility as well. And the other side of that is that quite often just repeating word for word what a female identifying artist has said, if they're not present, just literally being the amplification they need to say it out there. Because surprisingly, misogynists don't listen to women. So it actually is really helpful to repeat it word for word, just say what we are saying.
Like a retweet.
Just a retweet, or just saying it again, like in the voice. So there's something in there about creating a space for female identifying artists to speak, but also going into that space where they're not allowed and being the repetition and the amplification within that other space that we don't get access to. So there's some things. And the other thing is, the visibility really, really works, and I can tell you this because Ian Stonehouse, who was the manager of the electronic music studios at Goldsmiths, had to put together some facts, some statistics for Chris App, and he noted that in the year where they had a female sound engineer in the studios as tech support for the students, the female students who attended went up massively, and we're talking like a jump of like 50% or more. And when there were no female sound tech supports in the studio, it went down massively. So that just seeing someone else doing it is important. And I talk so much, but I'm just going to say one last little thing on that, which is when I was at Goldsmiths doing my master's, the most helpful thing anyone did for me was one of the sound techs who was manning the studios. I'd had my induction into this new studio, and the studio had just been built. It was flash as anything, and I was a little bit daunted because you don't want to be that person who goes into the new studio and messes it up. And this is going back some years, and so I sort of started my session, and then I went to get them, and I was like, "Can you come help me run through what I need to do? Just can you help me while I do it?" And they said no. They said, "You'll be fine. Go at the studio for 3 hours. Just go in there. You'll work it out." And that was actually the most helpful thing anyone did for me in 2 years of studying my master's, because I just started going in there and working out, and I had the time and the space. Yeah. Oh, questions? Sorry, I took the mic away from you.
It's our mic.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions or anything in particular? I mean, there was something I could speak to as well, as because when I started doing this kind of work, I mean, I just want to speak again to like the technologies of communication and how that like kind of disturbs the hierarchy and access to information. Like when Ladyz and Noyz started on MySpace and BBSs and MIRC. You know what that is. And it was like we didn't have this like easy way of connecting each other and getting resources. And even half the time, if you wanted to explain to someone how to use a certain like VSD or something, we didn't have, or we didn't even have VSDs, but I mean, if you wanted to explain like a lot of skills, we didn't have that technology available. So a lot of times it is that thing, like just like clearly saying like, what do you want me to, like, how do I put that voice out again? Yeah, retweet. Put that link out, like just repost it. Like that's not taking, like, that's exactly the way it was said and the way it was intended. And because it can be, it's formulated, it's already ready to go, you can like disseminate it, you know, in that way. I also wanted to speak to the fact that there's different, the important thing is the multiplicity of voices in these practices, right? So like, even though we're all feminists and we're all speaking to this, there's all different strategies. Like, for example, you'll see some more that are more institutional and use things like, and we'll talk more about how to get arts funding in order to like promote it. Some of us are more, you know, are not want to be away from capitalist culture and therefore don't use commodities in that way. And then there's just many different practices. So I just wanted to put it out there that although we're representing ourselves and how we do it, but there are more than just what's happening here, which you probably know. Do we have any more questions at all? Can you project?
I'll try. I'm just wondering what you think about campaigns like Key Change and the RSF, sort of women on funds, that kind of thing. Do you think they're effective, or you know, things like 50/50 festivals, for instance, by 2020?
Yeah, sure. I think obviously it's not just a numbers game, but those things are good. I mean, if it starts off something, why not? And I think, like you were saying, it makes a difference who's on stage and who's doing what. So definitely not a bad thing, but there's more to it than that. If it gets people thinking differently about how they organise, that's a good thing. And yeah, sorry, not the best answer, but I think that I don't work on this stuff much myself, and in terms of thinking about other people who've got quite a lot of really interesting things to say on these topics, I would say to look out for the Sonic Cyberfeminism's podcast, because there's going to be some discussion around those initiatives, especially from Marie Thompson, Frances Morgan, and Annie Go. They've had quite interesting discussions about that. Yeah.
Yeah, just speaking to that too, like it's again like what that whole thing of like just putting a woman on the lineup doesn't mean now you've dealt with it, you know. Like it's looking what happened behind that, what happened, why is that the institutional practice, why is that repeated, and how do we talk about things like in that, do we take apart the language that we're using to in our smaller circles, or can we expose the discomfort of being like, that's something I want to address, but I just don't know how. And I think that's the important part about like disrupting that narrative, is actually like creating a place where you can ask about it and be unsure about it and try to move forward.
Yeah, just in terms of things coming up, you might have some things that you want to share with everyone, but there's something happening in Berlin soon called DICE Festival that last year was called We Make Waves, and it's again something that's cool because it's not just music festival, but there's also discussions and films and workshops, and so I think in that sense that's kind of an interesting way of organising, and it's run by women. Yeah.
I find the PRS initiatives and the Key Change EU pretty positive in terms of role models, and it'll be interesting to see how it filters up from that visibility affecting artists who are, you know, in an early stage or maybe just learning their instruments and opening up things. You know, Chagall, for example, is part of the Key Change EU, and she's using the Mimu gloves, so that's a really visible wearable technology that's really great to see. I guess my one bugbear is sort of actually to do with all funding at the moment, and where we're at with funding is that there's a sort of lack of risk going on, and so the artists who are being featured in Key Change EU and featured in the PRS stuff tend to be like you know, a numbers game. I think you put it perfectly then. It was like, it's a numbers game. And where is the risk in that? Where is the funding bodies and the representation taking a gamble on the artist who is learning, who is experimenting, who is inventing, who is practicing, who is still finding themselves? Yeah.
Yes, you can. Yeah, that's another thing, isn't it? Is how those things get.
I'm just emerging, and I'm 56 this year, and I've been doing it for 20 years. So there's the answer there. I'm also the person behind the
Great. And
I'm gonna fly.
But that's my biggest bugbear at the moment, for me personally, as a performer. I haven't even performed yet, but somebody's given me a chance maybe next year. So that for me is a huge step forward. I've never had that chance at all. That's why I set up Feminatronic.
And you also have an excellent track on the rhinoceros compilation as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come and say that. Sorry.
Oh, no.
That's a big bugbear, you know, so the PRSF thing and everything, I keep saying, where have you been for 20 odd years, and even longer. But you can feel the anger from me probably now, so I might get some EGs right up there later. You say first.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say with the first Ladyz and Noyz, that was something that I was quite aware of as well, is that like on the very first one we had young women who are interested in experimenting with music. And when I say young, I mean I'm talking mother, daughter, like 7-year-old working with her mom, and then we had like 70-year-old women who had been like always inspired by like Jackie from Smegma and stuff like that, who had never released anything before. And that was the whole thing of being like, what do we, you know, when we open doors, do we actually have to like make qualifications in certain ways to make that door open in the first place? So I really appreciate that nod to it. And also, yeah, Feminatronic is a really great, your Twitter, and the practice of like retweeting, like that's what I'm talking about, just putting it out there about what's already there. And that's such a powerful way to like just change conversations.
I just wanted to mention, you might know about it already, DIY Space in London, and it's probably multitude of places, but just moved up here from there. And I think what's amazing that they do this first timers fest, so it's a weekend every year, and you have to have either never been in a band, not played your instrument, be a woman, person of color, just really encouraging people to start bands. And but apart from just having that night, they also have sessions where people can learn instruments or mixing or production, so kind of there's a whole infrastructure around it. And I think that infrastructure is a really part of the conversation, because if you're ever going to be able to apply for whatever funding that's out there, I mean, how do you get to that point? And I think that DIY scene is obviously really important in many different strands of whatever music culture you're part of, but I think sustaining those is really difficult. And so something around supporting whatever infrastructure is around you in whatever way that may be, however you can, I think is a really important way of supporting different people getting to perform whatever way.
Yeah, so just connecting that to the idea of PRSF and the funding bodies, is that my wish list right now is that funding would be put into coordinating and creating some kind of infrastructure around all these little initiatives being run by normally one or two people who have, you know, done what we've described here today, the feeling that Marlo was talking about at the beginning, and then the action coming out of it. And so there are a lot of things going on in these little pockets and little DIY endeavors. And my wish list would be that there would be some funding bodies creating an infrastructure that connects them and also funds them a bit. And so, for example, Red Bull recently did a Women in Music thing in Brighton, and the attendance was shocking. I went, and I heard about it on the day on Twitter, and I went along. And they were like, are there not many women making music in Brighton? I was like, yeah, it's Brighton. You know, you can't breathe for musicians. There's a musician everywhere. Everyone you meet is a musician, all the women. And it was just because they couldn't connect to all the groups. Like, they didn't connect to me, Bechdel, they didn't connect to Omni Records and things like that. So, yeah.
So we could go on for a while, but but we can't, because there's the film program coming up next. If we want to continue this discussion, we still have the hashtag LIN at TUSK, and we're happy to field those things. Also, the resources that we talked about today, I will post on the Facebook event for the TUSK Festival, maybe a link to that and some of the things if you'd like to look up at it yourself. And feel free to stop us and ask us questions as well. That's a good thing to do. And thank you so much for your attention.